Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to the library. My name is Alicia Yokoyama. I'm an adult services librarian here, and I'm so pleased to be welcoming Carolyn Wood back to the library. She's here to help us celebrate the forthcoming opening of the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatics Center. Carolyn Wood gained fame as a 1960 Olympic gold medalist in swimming. At 14, she became one of a handful of child athletes to win gold. Her first memoir, Tough Girl, chronicles her experiences training for the Olympics alongside her later in life trek on the Spanish Camino de Santiago. Tough Girl was awarded the 2017 Benjamin Franklin Award by the Independent Book Publishers Association and the 2019 Buck Dawson Authors Award by the International Swimming Hall of Fame. Her second book, Class Notes, begins with her first year of teaching, followed by a year working as the governess for Senator Robert and Ethel Kennedy's family in 1968 to 69. A lifelong Oregonian, she graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Oregon and Portland State University and taught high school English, literature, and composition for over 35 years. Wood is a member of the Oregon State Sports Hall of Fame, a fellow of the Northwest Writing Project, and a past participant in the Centrum, Fishtrap, and Banff Writers writing communities. Her work has appeared in Teachers as Writers, Elohi Gadugi Journal, REI Co-op Journal, Women Who Write, and Curve Magazine. And it is my great pleasure to introduce and welcome Carolyn Wood.
Okay, thank you very much. Alicia. Alicia's as I said, my best agent. I think this is my fourth time back to Lake Oswego Library. I've taught some classes, I've given some talks, and I was on Zoom during COVID. It's also an honor to help celebrate the opening of the Aquatics Center. I don't see any swimmers here, so too bad you're not going to hear about training back in the olden days. But my swimming started in Lake Oswego, I think when I was maybe 7 or 8, and Melinda Martin invited me to come swim in the lake. And then in 1957, the Multnomah Club used the lake as a place to train for long course. There were no long course or Olympic-sized pools in 1957. And we might have come in 58 also. I was thinking when I was driving here, we had carpools that would bring us out from Portland, from Beaverton. And my memory is that the Terwilliger Cutoff was a gravel road that somebody discovered was a shortcut from Beaverton. And we would come on that. There were also some swimmers who lived in Lake Oswego, and one of them was Judy Reese, who's sitting here right now. And then there were the Hendricks twins, who lived somewhere, and my best friend, Donnie Scholander, who lived on Westward Ho. Donnie and I had started swimming at the Aero Club when we were 10 years old. And we moved together from the Aero Club to the Multnomah Club when our coach, Ty Steinbeck, left to start a swim center in McMinnville. I don't remember too much about the swimming in the lake, except that I got a pulled muscle and I wasn't supposed to kick, which was fine because Judy was just a terrific kicker. But what I do remember is that we started, I think, on the South Shore, and we swam out and around buoys, and the water was green, and the person in front of you made a lot of bubbles with their kicks. And that's about all I remember from those workouts. There were no goggles in those days, so it was, cold in the water. The sun, in my memory, it was always sunny. There was always sun on my back. I'm sure that's not true, but there were also 2 boys who had come from Philadelphia to swim with us that summer, and they were very exotic. They wore Bermuda shorts. Olympic Dreams was the name of the talk today, and I think 1956-57 was when my dreams started, and it started when we went to the Multnomah Club, because in 1956 the Multnomah Club had a swimmer, Mo Murphy, who had made the '56 Olympic team. And in the pool downstairs at the MAC, the 25-yard pool, which was the only 25 indoor pool in Portland, was a picture that was about 6 feet by 10 feet, color of Maureen Murphy. And I thought that was about the best thing in the world. I wanted a picture of my Olympic dream. Jim Campbell, who came to be the coach in late 56, 57, came from Walter Reed Swim Club in Washington, D.C. In 52, he had had 2 Olympians, and in 56, he had 2 Olympians. So he had stories about how you train for the Olympics and what they would be like. He also brought the dolphin kick. I think I'm ahead in my talk right now, but in 1956, that was the first Olympics that had the butterfly. And prior to that, it was a kind of a hybrid stroke that had come from breaststroke. So people used a frog kick with their overarms. But they changed the rules, and Campbell was one of the developers of the dolphin kick. 1956 was the first Olympics that had a butterfly event. 1960, when I went, was the second. So, let's see. Yeah, we're doing good. So a side note. After the 2 summers that we used Lake Oswego, the Multnomah Club rented lanes at Jansen Beach. And for those of you who are Portlanders, Jansen Beach had 2 55-yard pools side by side that were built in 1927. That was the only Olympic-sized pool in the whole area. There were very few indoor pools also. Portland Parks and Portland Schools in 1917, 1915 at Shattuck and Cooch built indoor pools at their school. Buckman added one in 1942. There was a very progressive parks person, Dorothea Lynch, who made many community projects, especially when Portland was part of the shipyard building. So she was the one who started moonlight concerts at Washington Park. She had collaboration between the schools in the Park District. And I think it was her influence that made Tuolumne Hills build their first indoor pool next to a school at Beaverton High School in 1955. Lake Oswego did not build an indoor pool till 1970 next to Lake Oswego, High School, where incidentally I assisted coach in 1975. The Northeast Y had a little 20-yard pool, and then private clubs like the Aero Club and Columbia had indoor pools. Aero Club had an 18-yard one. You could really get a sprint going in an 18-yard pool. And 20-yard pool at Columbia. So, Lake Oswego is going to have this new aquatic center, and I just applaud them. It may be a long time coming, but aquatic centers are not just recreation sites. They're places where kids learn how to swim and save lives. And it's essential that our school districts, our rec districts, and our community get every kid learning how to swim, because we help each other. And maybe you'll have a really good swimmer and have somebody on an Olympic team. So I'm also talking about practice. And I just thought I'd read from Tough Girl of how I learned to practice. And what were the components of practicing that made it so compelling? So I'm going to go back to the Aero Club. Don Scholender's mother, Martha Dent, was a double for Maureen O'Sullivan in the Tarzan movies. And she knew Johnny Weissmuller, who had been an Olympic swimmer and had played Tarzan, and she had lots of advice about almost everything, if not everything. Oh, that's not in the book. Donnie and I became really good friends and very competitive training partners. I could always beat him because he was only up to my shoulder. That fall, so the fall, this would have been 1955, Ty taught us how to do flip turns, freestyle and backstroke. We raced each other widths. Now, if the pool is 18 yards, you can imagine how short the width was. We sprinted back and forth, flipping and counting, stopping only to argue. Our goal was always 100 widths. Was that 56? No, we're at 60. No, we're not. And then one of us would shove off, determined to get 100 first. Sometimes Ty would set us up against older swimmers. He would give us a head start, a dive and 2 strokes perhaps, and then sick one of the 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds after us. We'd thrash down and back swimming for our lives. Sometimes we'd throw a big inner tube in the deep end, the one the kids fought over during playtime, and we'd teeter-totter it until huge waves swamped the little 18-yard pool and someone yelled at us to stop. And sometimes we'd just mess around in the deep end, diving to the bottom or trying to talk underwater. So in analyzing what made that so much fun, that we would do it 3 times a week, and then later, when we were older, 6 times a week, twice a day sometimes, it always started with intent, with a goal of something, like learning how to flip turn, or to go fast, or to beat Donnie, or to beat the big kids, or not get caught in a race. And there's repetition, and we would set these goals, 100 widths, or a goal, I'm gonna do 40 miles of walking this week, or I'm gonna walk, well, whatever. Persistence and a reward, the simple pleasure of doing something maybe and being done with it, or doing something and finding joy in it. So that was one year with Ty Steinbeck as our coach, but he left for McMinnville, and we got this new guy, Jim Campbell. Yeah. Jim was a competitive rower, a college basketball coach. He had served 7 years in the Army Air Corps as a gunner. Quote, he is known as an aggressive coach who places prime importance on physical condition. That was an article in the journal. After the war, he'd worked at Walter Reed, and then I told you about that. So when he came to the MAC, he had all of us, the whole team, the big kids, the little kids, sitting in the bleachers at the end of the pool, at the shallow end. He didn't say anything at first. He merely paced in front of us like he was trying to find words. And then he started. You can be a champion if you're willing to work hard. Or you can be a loafer or a quitter. It's up to you. He paused and he looked at us practically one by one. Guts, ladies and gentlemen. Guts are the difference between a champ and a chump. He paced back and forth again, his black hair tousled, his face red and wrinkled. He had on what he would wear to every practice and meet for the next year and a half. Rumpled khaki pants, a navy blue sweatshirt, dirty white sneakers, no socks. Guts, he repeated. Now let's see what you can do. And we jumped into line in fleets of 6 or 7 behind the lane markers across the pool. Let's see who's fastest. Hut! He shouted, and we dived and sprinted a length. Up, up, get up! Came his shouts from the far end, and we hauled ourselves out and set up for another sprint. Somebody might have started up the ladder, but he yelled, stop, and made her do 5 haul-outs in punishment. No loafers on this team, he barked. No ladders. Use your bodies. Guts. We didn't stop the whole practice, it seemed. Red-faced, panting, sweating, really. We dived, sprinted, and hauled out for almost an hour. Some kids skipped a lap and lay out on the deck. Others got slower and slower, changing to breaststroke. And when someone stopped and set his feet down at the shallow end, Jim roared, swim to the end of the pool. Don't be a quitter. Sometime during this first test, while he paced back and forth on the pool deck, he shouted out again, Let's see who has guts. Let's see who's a champ. Who can work it up a notch? And in my head, I shouted back, I can. So that was Jim, and Judy and I loved Jim Campbell. The older kids did not like him very much, but you know, they just didn't have guts. They were quitters. It strikes me now somehow that while Jim was there, I came to a realization that how you practiced mattered as much as whether you practiced. That is, everybody practiced, but some of us practiced with more attention, with more interest than merely getting through the workout. And I loved the whole world of swimming. I was sort of hoping some kids would be here because it was so fun to think back of what I liked about it. I know Kristen was a athlete, basketball and volleyball, I think. So similar. Some kids swam competitively because their older brothers or sisters did. I'm trying to explain what I liked about swimming. Some had parents who wanted them out of the house, and some who wanted them to work hard and win. Some hated to train, but loved to race. Others enjoyed the camaraderie of the team. I loved everything about swimming, the word that encompassed teams, training, racing, age groups, carpools, long course, short course, horseplay and pranks, medals, trophies, time trials, records, and pictures in the paper. I liked to train, the daily pattern of warm-ups, repeats, exhaustion, cool down, rest. I liked the slow buildup of distance in the fall, weaving up and down the lanes to avoid head-on collisions and to escape tailgaters, the aerobic tests of winter, the tapering toward important meets. The meets themselves didn't scare me or make me nervous. They were like big circus events, a new act coming up every few minutes, the roiling crowd of kids from 8 to 18, straining to hear the loudspeaker announcements, hoping not to miss their races, the gun, the cheers, the lane counters for events longer than 4 laps, the coach's whistles, the happy chaos of preliminaries, and then the posting of the results, looking to find your name and time, looking to find your main competitors, looking to see if you made the finals and which lane you might be in. So 60 years later, these early lessons in training came to inform my preparation for walking 500 miles on the Camino de Santiago across Spain. And then the next fall, walking another 500 miles across France to join up to where I'd started before. And then every long distance hike I've taken since. In fact, this morning I was out training because in a month I leave for 25 days walking the Camino in Portugal. So each of those tests, I guess, they aren't competitions, but start with a desire or an intent to walk 500 miles in 40 days, to practice being alone, to be aware. When you practice regularly, whatever the sport or activity, swimming, yoga, French horn, ballet, mindfulness, gratitude, cooking, weaving, you make discoveries if you pay attention while you're practicing. On the first Camino, I practiced noticing, but I kept getting stuck on my loss, trying to understand and explain it, to question. I was so in my thoughts sometimes that I would miss the marker of the trail. There are little scallop shells, and when I came out of my whatever I was doing, there was no one around me, and I was clearly lost, and I would have to backtrack till I could find another scallop shell. And at first, I discovered a technique to remind myself to let thoughts go, to pick up a small rock and carry it until I let go of whatever I was complaining about or thinking about or perseverating on, and I stopped telling myself stories. One time, about 3 weeks in, it was in Lyon, I lost a pencil case. And then the next day, I lost my neck scarf, and I flew into a rage. But if you're only carrying 16 pounds of material for 40 days, every item is essential. But I thought, not again, enough. Where's a stone to pick up and carry? Practice, release, I advised myself. And here's something else I discovered. You have to let go to move forward, just like in swimming. It's the secret of a good stroke. A swimmer's arm enters the water, makes a catch, then it pulls, and then it pushes, and finally it releases in recovery. And without letting go of the stroke, the swimmer can't move forward. I needed more work on the release, I told myself on the Camino. And here was the discovery. If one practices release and returns to the present over and over again, one can move forward without getting stuck. By the end of 30 days hiking, I was practicing more effectively and getting results. So these were the old lessons that I had learned long before swimming. I'd started with the intent to walk the Camino, to learn its lessons. I'd certainly experienced repetition, mile after mile after mile after mile, and I was reaping the rewards, which was the simple joy of being outdoors, of watching the landscape and the weather and the season change over 40 days between the end of September and the 1st of November, and re-meeting strangers again and again in unlikely places. A little market, the bottom bunk in the albergue. Jim Campbell left after a year and a half to go back and coach at University of Pennsylvania, and the new coach that came to the Multnomah Club was Walt Schluter. He came from Florida, and he worked on two things: new techniques in conditioning and stroke technique, hand placement, the entry, grasp of the water, the press, release, and recovery. We timed our repeats like we'd never done before so that we could notice when our time started to get slower and spur ourselves to go on. We started taking our pulse after 5 or 10 repeats to see if it was fast, because if it was going too fast and we weren't recovering fast enough, it meant we needed rest. We became responsible for paying attention to and knowing our bodies every single day. It was much like my experience of yoga nowadays. You can go to practice and mindlessly repeat the postures for an hour. You can do downward dog and child's pose and triangle and every single one. Or you can begin to go deeper and sharpen awareness, how your fingers are placed on the mat and how much weight is in each knuckle, the awareness of which muscle is working and which one isn't, awareness of bone alignment, the tilt of the pelvis. It's a practice of knowing the body and of focusing the mind on the immediate now. Each day, each experience might be different than the day before, but you're awake to the process. This kind of practice was not unlike, I'm not sure I could explain this, but it was not unlike teaching literature year after year, where you read the same novel 30 times, and sometimes passages 3 times in a day times 30, so that's 90. But each time, the reading and the book is different depending where I was in my life. Mrs. Farron taught us that when we were sophomores in high school, and I thought, oh, yeah, sure. I think we were reading Silas Marner, which I never did read again, but she said, when you read this as an adult, maybe it was something else. But I certainly know that's true because, well, I can't tell you now the name of the novel, but the year that my mother died, that book took on a whole different meaning, and it was certainly not the meaning that 16-year-olds had. When my granddaughter was 2 years old, I went back to visit her in New York, and she was obsessively stacking blocks as high as she could get them, and then knocking them down over and over again. And each time she knocked them down, she greeted the explosion with laughter and joy. And she practiced words the same way. I remember she was trying to say yellow, but she would say yellow, 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 yeah. Over and over. She clearly had intention. She wanted that tower high. She wanted that word to be understood. She had a daily practice, and she found joy, reward in the whole process of building and destroying. And she had external rewards from her parents and grandparents. So we are all in a lifetime of practice. From those first stumbling steps we take to stacking blocks, to trying to learn to talk and to read. When I taught American Lit in the spring, we'd read Walton. And I was particularly interested in the idea of life as an experiment, of his experiment to drop out for 2 years and create enough time to think and to read and to write. And so I would ask my students in the spring to design an experiment that they could do for a week or two to observe themselves or others. A year or so before I retired, I wrote a short piece about the tyranny of bell schedules that had measured my life for over 35 years. 60 really, if I counted all the years I was a student also. And I pondered what it would be like to escape those bells. I wanted to improve the nick of time, which is what Thoreau wrote that he wanted to do with his experiment, to practice being present in my own life. Like Thoreau, I did not want to come to the end of my life having never been present for it. This is what I wrote back right maybe 2 years before I retired. You want to begin the year with a new look. You want to break away from the old routines, the grape nuts and bananas, the 7-minute drives, the rice cakes, string cheese, prunes, the bells, the break, duty, prep, peacocks and princesses, every Friday football, every Saturday papers, every Sunday the New York Times. The bells remind you of clocks ticking away what's left of your life, a diminishing flow like a summer stream, no longer full with rain and snow melt, but just a stream, a rocky creek. Every 47 minutes, a reminder, start, stop, pass. Minutes like water over rocks, seeping into sand, pooling up and spilling into small, diminishing trickles. The bells that call to order and dismiss, the bells that push forward the day over and over again in a pulsing rush toward afternoon and night. I wonder what would happen if the days were not pushed. What would happen if time flowed in its natural sequence? The sky edging from darkness to gray, rising like a tide of light, pushing the flotsam of cloud upward, and then the sun's rim, liquid gold, the slant of light through twigs and leaves. What would happen if you watched time's river rise and flow, lifting you on its back and carrying you on its crest until lying back you rested on the receding light, languishing in the slow pools of afternoon, the tips of the firs trembling and lifting, the ropes of birch leaves swaying in the light like sea kelp. To the west, the evening glow would linger, holding on to color. What if you could watch until the last drops spilled from the edge and then you came to know the night? Oh, but what would be served by such a life? Observation, contemplation, deliberation. What if your life came unplugged, disconnected, out of sync with the rest of the world? What if you rode this planet on one full circle rounded star, paying attention to light and plants and water, seeing the way rain gathers in puddles or dew beads on grass, noticing the day violets open under the firs or ants appear in your bathroom? You could, you know, shut off the bells. You could cut loose, unplug, begin. You could improve the nick of time. On my final day in Spain, that first Camino, a storm blew in and rain drenched the city. Late November, time to return home. The long walk had altered my perspective and given hints of a possible future. But unlike the tough girl who came home from Lansing, that was where the Pan Am trials were, determined to make the Olympic team, I had no specific goal other than to stay awake, pay attention, and wait for the lessons of the Camino. You don't take your feet off the bottom, swim dock to dock, race, and win all in one summer, I reminded myself. It's all practice. Last night I was cleaning out a drawer and I found a journal, a little bedtime journal from 2012. And on one page I had written an Aristotle quote: "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit." So if we are what we practice, what is it? Daily meditation, phone scrolling, friendliness, music, running, complaining, blaming, writing, spacing out, outrage, curiosity, gratitude, kindness. So I think I'll end with some questions. What have you practiced since you were a little kid? I practiced swimming and probably about a million other things, but that was my big thing. What do you intentionally practice today? And what might you set out to do or notice, not once, but regularly? Like maybe you could design an experiment for yourself. Spring is coming. What could you do for 30 days and observe, or 60, or 100? It's just an experiment. All you have to do is practice with intent, repetition, persistence, and paying attention to the reward. Last Sunday, I was walking on the Wildwood Trail, and I was at milepost 12, right by the Rocking Chair Creek, and there was a rock with a brass plate on it, and it said, "The journey is the reward." So that's my final words. And I really appreciate that you're here and that you're going to have a pool where some kids are going to learn some of those same lessons. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Do you still swim? I do, but it's been maybe in the last 10 years that I started back, and more when COVID happened, but only twice a week. You know, I swim a mile, or I swim for like 35 minutes, however far that takes me, and then I do water aerobics, which gets my heart rate up. Swimming, unless I'm doing repeats, my pulse rate doesn't go up. It's a good thing. But I think you have to stick with something. and pay attention to the steps that you're taking. I know that my father, I mean, if you're talking about for kids, my father always said when I would be disappointed, oh, you're just in a plateau. Just in a plateau. In fourth grade, I learned what a plateau was. But I think adults have plateaus too. And you lose interest, and you have to remind yourself. And that's where the rewards come in. If you're not paying attention, you don't get the reward. And sometimes you recalibrate your goals.
I live near Lake Oswego, and I don't know how to swim. And so it's been my goal for years to learn how. Taking classes, my kids are young adults now, so I kind of watch them as they took their swimming lessons and all that stuff. So, I want to join the rowing club in Ethel. For years I wanted to do that, but you have to kind of know the basics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
You got to pass the test.
That's right.
And so I belong to a club in Mountain Park. And so recently I thought, well, if I'm going to learn how to swim, maybe I should just spend some time in the pool. Well, I used to just be in a pool for 30 days every day. Not necessarily wanting to learn anything, but being in a space where I'm being.
Yeah.
And then perhaps, people ask me, oh, where's your deadline? When do you want to know? I don't want that pressure, because I've been
Yeah.
in the pool.
Yeah.
They all of a sudden, my goggles, well, I have like countless goggles, so I just toss them away.
Throw money on the bottom of the pool. That's what our old teachers used to do.
I'm wondering what would you say for a swimmer who wants to swim but can't?
Oh, you can.
Correct, right?
Won't.
I have this fear.
You're a swimmer who won't. You're a swimmer to be who won't right now. Judith. This woman taught swimming lessons in the lake.
But what is just one sentence you could tell me that just continually, just regardless of if I do learn how to swim or
Look, you have the intention already. That's what I would say. That's right. I go stand in that pool for 5 days and pay attention.
when I was looking around,
Looking around for that teacher. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You find a teacher, and there are wonderful teachers who work with adults. And the center will have one.
So this has been very helpful for me.
Good. And then the next goal will be the rowing team.
Yes, thank you.
What's your favorite memory of the Olympics?
Oh, well, I'll tell you a funny story of the Olympics, because I was just saying to Karen, this was my uniform that I wore every day because the skirts and the blouses were so ugly and horrible. But it isn't mine because we were warned not to leave anything in the locker room when we went to the Olympic pool for the first time, because we were training in pools that were outside of Rome. And then our first day at the Olympic pool, don't leave anything in the locker room. Well, of course, I left everything in the locker room. And my uniform was gone. And Betty Baldwin, who was our manager, said, I told you not to leave anything in the locker room. You're just going to not have. I said, I'm going to be on the relay. I have to have a uniform. This was some gymnast who sprained an ankle or something, so it's a little small for me. But honestly, winning that gold medal was just incredible. And before that race, Australia, who was our main competitor, won, and they were playing the God Save the Queen, and our little relay all sang God Bless America in the locker room. It was all that camaraderie, I think, that was pretty extraordinary. Oh, gosh. What do I miss about teaching high school? Was Paul Loveliner in your class? No. It was the connection with kids that goes on and on, even if you don't see them. I mean, just that energy, which is terrifying if you ever walk into a high school, it's a pretty energy-filled place. But to have your own set of students through a whole year is such an incredibly rich experience. I think it's the highest profession in the world, and I really hope that we can begin to recognize our teachers, support them, and keep public schools alive and rich, because they are for everyone. They are what make us a unit. But I'll tell you what I love is hearing from these kids out of the blue, like this Paul. I have no idea what year I had him. He's working for the Defense Department in Washington, D.C. His parents owned a landscaping company. You probably see the trucks around town. And I mean, he was just like, I shouldn't say that. He was just like a little quiet, nerdy guy. And here he is, and he's going to be in Porto, Portugal, at the same time I am. I haven't heard from him since he was a junior in high school, and he's now probably 42 years old. And that's what I love about having been a teacher. Okay, well, I'm sure everybody needs to get home to make their chili.